The world we live in today is quite a hectic one, where everything is evolving with the new technology, new ideas that people come up with. But this isn't the first time that this has happened. The old saying that history repeats itself, well, it's dead right. The 1960s were the exact same as they are today, where everything was changing with the new ideas and new beliefs that came about. The 1960s, it was a place of evolution, a time where things went from the old way to the new way, and it changed the future in so many different ways. It was a period of movements and demonstrations based around the principles of people's beliefs. One of the biggest was the civil rights movement, and it had a major effect on mostly southern states. Florida, however, even though it was a southern state, wasn't affected the same as others. This was due to the unique situation that occurred there already. The connections between blacks and whites were never as bad as places like Texas or Alabama, but they weren't perfect. I talked with a person who not only lived through the 1960s, but remembers them well enough to write a book. This person was Mike Pyle, and he's an attorney and an author in Daytona Beach. He described a setting in which blacks and whites lived together as people. They might not have treated each other the same, but there was no conflicts that arose that were too great. There was, of course, still some discomfort with the laws, that people weren't equal. Blacks weren't allowed to cross the bridge at some places, and they weren't even allowed to shop in the same stores as whites. This discrimination was horrible and oppressed so many different people. Signs would hang in windowsills saying things like, "No dogs, no blacks, no Mexicans." But there wasn't any major demonstrations or major discords against these store owners or against the signs. And in Florida, everything was extremely peaceful. That the real southern states, as Mr. Pyle put it, places like Alabama and Mississippi, well, that's where the heat really rose. In these places like Alabama or Mississippi, there was so much fighting. Police would fight crowds of demonstrators, having dogs attack these perpetrators and then drag them along. And if they resisted, they would beat the person until they stopped. This, of course, inspired more and more riots that would ensue people. The hatred would build up, and sometimes it would result to violence, and in the extreme cases, they would result to killing each other. There were some demonstrations that were held at local diners, one of which Mr. Pyle remembered quite well was a local Woolworth. Nothing too eventful happened at this one, but there were some Woolworths that had major demonstrations that had crowds of people outside the doors. Integration was another major thing in our history, and it was a very rocky road. Instead of fighting it in Florida, we embraced it unknowingly, with slight change over time. There wasn't any major resistance to the integration, but there was resistance to what caused the integration. For example, Mr. Pyle attended Seabreeze High School at the time of the integration of schools. He remembers that they tried to bus him to another school so blacks could go to his school. This raised a problem to him and his family, not because blacks were going to his school, but they tried to move him to a different one. There was no fight against the integration of society in Florida, but there was in other places like Alabama, where riots and killings occurred quite frequently. The reason for this difference would most likely be caused from the way the population was consisted of. In Florida, there were a lot of rich white northerners that would come down either for retirement or for a summer house. Northerners were already accustomed to integrated society, and so they had no problem with the black community. In places like Alabama, where riots were taking place, the people fighting against integration had never seen anything like it. It is, of course, that human nature is to resist change, and it would escalate to the level of open violence. Another reason might be because of the people that helped the civil rights movement. People like Mary McLeod Bethune, who not only fought for the civil rights movement, but actively strived for a better place in Florida. She did many remarkable things like building schools and getting a part of a beach sanctioned off so blacks could go to the beach. So really, in the end, it was a combination of many different things that not only caused Florida to be great back then, but it continues to be great today.